Hi, this is beloved political commentator Matt Lewis welcoming you back to another exciting episode of Matt Lewis and the News. Thank you again for everyone who supports us on Patreon, and I want to thank the Leadership Institute sponsoring this episode, and we're taping here today. I interned at the Leadership Institute. I worked here for 4 years. It is an awesome, amazing organization. It's America's premier conservative training organization. If you've ever wanted to run for office, to get a job on Capitol Hill, to learn how to run a campaign, you name it, how to go on television, the Leadership Institute has training for you. I highly recommend it. You should definitely do it. It's leadershipinstitute.org. All right, our guest today is Ravi Zacharias. He has spent the last 45 years commending the Christian faith and addressing life's great existential questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. He believes the truth of Jesus Christ can endure the toughest critiques and philosophical attacks. He has authored or edited over 25 books in the fields of theology, apologetics, comparative religion, and philosophy. And Ravi's latest book is called The Logic of God. It's his first ever devotional book. It's an honor to have him with us here today. Ravi Zacharias, welcome to the news.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to be here and an honor to be with you. We read some of your material and hear it. Nice to be with you face to face. And the room is called the Borum Room, F.W. Borum, a different Borum from Australia. Was in England, one of my favorite authors. So any room that's called Borum, I'm comfortable in there.
Well, it's scary and humbling to hear when people read my stuff. I learned just a year or two ago that my pastor actually was reading my stuff. And I have to say it chastened me a little bit. I'm not sure I need to know that I want to pretend nobody reads it, you know. But thank you. And please click the ads, I may say.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit about apologetics. I mean, you are one of the premier Christian apologists, most highly respected in the world. And yet, I have a question about the entire concept of apologetics, right? I mean, some people would say that faith in Christ is not about logic or reason or philosophy, that faith by definition is something completely different. What is the importance of apologetics, and is there, in terms of bringing people to Christ, does that help, or is it just a leap of faith?
Boy, that's a great question. And when we organized this ministry as it now stands in 1984, apologetics was almost a bad word, you know. And even today, in some ways, if you say he's an apologist for, it sort of taints the person immediately that this is the prejudicial disposition the person has. Historically, going back to the disciplines in theological training, apologetics was a great discipline of understanding how great thinkers across time have defended the faith. If you go back right to the New Testament, you've got the Apostle Paul, you've got Apollos, you've got Stephen and some of the others presenting a defense of what it is they believed and why they believed. Paul was called before the Roman royalty, you know, to say this guy's a follower of the way, and Paul would say, let me speak, and he would be attacked by another attorney or someone. But if apologetics is to be properly understood, of all people, it was the fisherman, Peter, who gives us the classic use of the term in his epistle. Set apart Christ in your hearts as Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer and the reason for the hope that is within you to anyone who asks of you, and do it with gentleness and respect. That compartmentalized description, what does it really mean? Who you are is where you begin. How you do it is critically important. What you're doing is the means. Reason, apologia, for the hope that is within you. So it's not trying to vanquish the opponent. It's answering a question that is being asked. So I think it's a very legitimate discipline. And I'd like to say this, it's not a military term. It's a term of reason. It's a term of dialogue. It's almost a legal term. So if it's a military term, then you say, you know, I don't want to fight with this guy. But here's the most important thing. From my point of view, I do not intend to change anybody's mind. I don't wish to do that because somebody else would come and do that. In my framework of belief, it's God that changes hearts. And that's the only sure apologetic. Apologetic is the means, but it is not the ends, and it is not the process by which a heart can be changed. It adds to the mix in which God uses that component. For example, at the day of Pentecost, they're all confused. Peter stands up and says, "Let me explain. Let me give you an apologetic. This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel." The whole resurrection is an apologetic. Prophecy is an apologetic. How it's used is critical. Wrongly used, it's dangerous.
Right. But there are different preachers who, there are preachers who give the fire and brimstone sermon, scaring people into the arms of Christ. There are people who use maybe emotion. There are people who want to say that that those dinosaur bones were put there retroactively by God. There's all sorts of people, but what you're engaging in, I think, is actually recognizing that we have an increasingly sophisticated culture. More people are more educated, and I'll put it to you this way in the form of a question. Do you think that you have the potential, or people like you have the potential, to reach intellectuals, academics, highly educated people who might dismiss other appeals to Christianity, that you might be able to minister and reach them?
I like to describe it this way, Matt. There's a graduate level of skepticism out there. You know, people are more informed, and there's a pluralistic society out there. It's not just that you have one option. There's a secularized consciousness out there. There's an argumentative disposition on our campuses. How can you just stand up and make a proclamation without being able to defend it? So it has to be done. As C.S. Lewis used to say, the question is not whether you do apologetics or not. The question is whether you're doing it well or not doing it well. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, does it make any difference? Absolutely, Matt. You know, I've covered the globe for nearly 50 years. I do a couple hundred days a year on the road. I meet people in the plane, you meet them in a restaurant, you meet them walking through the halls of an airport, and the numbers that stop and tell you, and invariably it's a preamble like this: I was really struggling with my belief. I was wondering where to go for answers. I was struggling whether I should live or not. My life was falling apart. My family was falling apart. So it tells you that the message is critical, but the means has to be in terms of what the message is all about. You cannot use ignoble means. You don't want to fool people into a belief. You use the word emotion. Emotion is a very important thing. Emotionalism is the wrong thing. And frankly, I think when you go back to the 1980s, in the way the so-called televangelism was going on, and people using emotion and these false fake smiles and hyperbole and all kinds of stories coming which were unverifiable, did great damage to the Christian faith. I still think we are living with the fallout of that cynicism that was born because of a false methodology. Does apologetics work? Absolutely. Saul of Tarsus's conversion to Paul and his goal to reach Rome and the confluence of three cultures, Hebrew, Roman, and Greek, God shaped the perfect apologist for the times.
Well, what do you mentioned, like the televangelists? I mean, none of us really know what is on any person's heart, but in general speaking, I mean, do you have a sense that these are people who were true believers, who may in some cases have been led astray or gone astray, been tempted by earthly belongings, or do you think in some cases that it was kind of a sham?
You know, that's the thing. Any stigma can lick a good dogma. And the famed statement by George F.W. Will years ago. If a person is using the medium to seduce others and to self-aggrandizement and false purposes, then it's wrong. There were many in those days, I think, who were very well-intentioned, and many also who did a very good job. Some who still do a good job and do not allow the medium to shape and distort the message. The medium can.
Yeah.
You know, it can easily shape you into doing things. Because television is a cold medium. You have to warm it up or you're going to put people to sleep. But it's also a seductive medium, because truth is primarily a property of propositions. It's not the visual.
Yeah.
If you take a sound bite on the news for 30 seconds and show the piece of news, you don't get the whole context. So to answer your question, there were both who were using it rightly and well. There were those who were using it falsely. There were those who were misusing it for personal purposes. And the skeptic would always go to the third category and therefore debunk all of them, which I think was the wrong reaction to have.
So, Francis Schaeffer, kind of famed apologist, had this place called L'Abri. It was in the Swiss Alps, I think.
Correct, in Lausanne, yeah.
And he would have like intellectuals and artists. I think Eric Clapton might have even visited there, and wanted to get a sense for how important Francis Schaeffer was kind of in paving the way for apologetics today.
I think Francis Schaeffer was the wake-up call, and his co-authorship book with Everett Koop at that time, talking about what's happening to the human race, where we are headed. Francis Schaeffer was really a brilliant apologist and woke up the church. His books, Death in the City, people don't talk much about, but that's what motivated him. That's a book on Jeremiah. But then there's Escape from Reason, The God Who Is There. So many new vistas. He understood the place of reason, but he also was understanding his audience. One of my colleagues now, Os Guinness, is a product in many ways of Francis Schaeffer. I met Dr. Schaeffer. I hosted him when I was teaching in Nyack, and I chatted with him. But for the first time I heard him, I was a young undergraduate student in Toronto. He came in for a lot of criticism, even within the evangelical world. They said, what is this guru from the mountains coming to tell us to get so cerebral? But he saw it coming, and we didn't take him very seriously. The fact of the matter is, Matt, as I'm sure you well know, as Donald Cogan, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, said, the longest journey in life is from the head to the heart. And that's real not only in Christian apologetics, that's real in life. If you treat all of the questions of your family just from this point of view and never get to the heart of feeling, your spouse or your children are going to say, my father's disconnected from reality. Yeah. I think when Jesus wept, he wept even though he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. That's an amazing thing. He didn't submerge emotion. He brought it within the context of what the ultimate answers were as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about some of the sort of common things that you might hear from people who are not believers. One is, hey man, people believe different things. Maybe all the religions are true. Maybe there's enlightenment to be found in Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or whatever. How is Jesus different from other gods or other religious figures?
When a person says that, they don't understand any of the religions. They basically betray an ignorance of the world of religion. Would you want that kind of a pilot? I know the instruments say I'm at 10,000, but people believe different things, I'm going to not listen to the air traffic controller. Would you want to do that when you go to a court of law? I know you think I've committed the murder, but people believe different things. They all have their own truth. It's a self-defeating proposition, because if you give yourself that prerogative, you have to give the other person the sense of prerogative too, and the other person may just think you're a blatant liar. But are you going to buy into that as well? All religions are exclusive, Matt. Every worldview. Sometimes you get writers from the pantheistic worldview. From my own nation of birth, I see articles like, we're all embracing, we accept everyone. It's simply not true. That's why they illegalize conversion out there. If every person has a right to believe whatever they want, let them be converted. Let them choose the path that they want to walk. If something is true, the opposite of that is going to be false. You cannot qualify all truth interminably. You have to have an absolute at some point. So, for example, you look at a Hindu and you say, so you accept all worldviews? Yeah. So what about reincarnation? Oh, yeah, every birth is a rebirth. And how do you determine that? Oh, by the law of karma. They've already given their two qualifiers. Okay, that every birth is a rebirth and every rebirth is the base of a previous birth. You ask a Muslim, devout Muslim, Oh yeah, that's the very word. What it means, submission. We submit to the authority of our last and the greatest prophet and the Quran. And so every worldview has its absolutes. The question is this: which of the worldviews answers the questions with truth and coherence? Are the answers that you give to the questions from your so-called sacred text true in conformity with reality? When all of the answers are given, are they a coherent worldview? And to my way of thinking, at the age of 17, when I came to Christ on a bed of suicide, never having opened a Bible in my life, and finally following through to the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, I have to tell you, to me, he's the only one who embodies that which I think is of ultimate worth and value. Who on earth would think of the Lord of the universe allowing himself to be crucified half naked before humanity, being mocked and jeered, and crying out with the essence of love, "Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing"? To me, the supreme ethic of love and the embodiment of truth in the person of Jesus Christ, I find he is the only one who treats truth as exclusive and demonstrates it in his life and embodiment.
And you mentioned your background. You come from India. You contemplated or attempted suicide?
I came to follow Jesus Christ on a bed of suicide. I was 17 years old. And I'll tell you what, every time I mention that, I never used to mention it in the early days. I was so ashamed of it. Still, in many ways, it pricks, you know. You say, what on earth does this sound like? You know, does it sound like a psychological basket case from years gone by? No, it wasn't a psychological basket case. I was just existentially very real. And many young people come forward and talk to me. And for that matter, adults, they will say, I was so close to ending it all. I hear this all the time. When I was speaking at Oxford, a young man backpack came up and said, I was on the verge of just slicing my wrists. And for some reason, I pressed the button on my radio, whatever, and your voice came on. He said, never heard of you. And you were talking about taking your life and what happened. This is at a very serious level. Well, we all know some big names in the United States and in Europe have taken their lives in recent times. That happens sometimes for truly chemical, neurological issues, and they should get the best of professional counseling. But oftentimes it also happens with emptiness, purposelessness, and that is at an epidemic level. So to me, I think it's a very real issue. In Belgium, it happens so often, they don't even call it suicide, they call it opting out of life. Where there is the death of hope, there begins the hope for death. And you can be the walking dead in this world and people not even know it. So I say purpose and meaning of life are at the core of all questions. All other answers hang on those pegs.
One of the things that I'm sure you hear a lot is how could a loving God have a world where there's so much suffering, where horrible things happen, where there's sin and evil, and innocent people go through horrible suffering? How could a loving God, if God exists, why would he allow this to happen? How do you answer that?
I think it's the most, you know, they say virtue and distress and vice and triumph makes atheists of mankind. And when people question that, I often think, do they not think we think about that? Do they not think we struggle with that? You walk past a street in some places and you see open wounds and you see suffering and your heart just skips a beat. If the question is legitimate, how could a loving, all-powerful God allow this? Then the question is also legitimate. How does the random collocation of atoms that is uncaused and came here by accident justify a question such as that? Moral reasoning is what prompts that question. Human worth is what prompts that question. But neither of those two assumptions are true without a creator God and without the ability to reason morally. So the only way it is valid is if I am a creature of essential worth, and the fact is that morality has an ontic point of reference, but the naturalist cannot afford that luxury. So the question has to be phrased, how do we explain this answer with God in the paradigm, not God evicted? Because if God is evicted, then the very question disappears as well. Polar bears don't ask the question, how can I go and slaughter that seal right now? It's not fair. They just think by virtue of survival. We think and by virtue of the why and the what of human existence. In my book with my colleague Vince Vitale, we've written a book called Why Suffering. It's a pretty thick book. It takes on all. So my quickest answer is this. To a wounded and a suffering person, only a wounded and a suffering Savior can give you the answer. He explains why he went to the cross. He explains that sin, before it destroys on the outside, destroys on the inside. He explains that I don't live in an island. There is a solidarity to mankind, and everything I do affects everybody else. He explains that death is not the end of all existence. There is an opening of a window that we don't see in our finite setting. He explains that pain is necessary so that we can understand that we are not sovereign over ourselves. He explains that he doesn't take us just in spite of suffering. It is through suffering that he actually shapes us. So some of the greatest saints have been those who've endured the greatest pain and find out what God's grace is all about. So those answers are in a text and a context in a larger way. Quick illustration. There's a gal in Atlanta, Georgia, outside Atlanta, who was born with SIPA, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis. Those people, a handful in the world, don't feel pain. But the problem is, if they step on a nail while they're playing a sport, they don't even know they have cut themselves. There are many negatives to not feeling pain. And the mother said on television, every night I prayed, dear God, please let Ashlyn develop a sense of pain. In this finite picture, if pain is necessary to open us to reality, is it impossible in the mind of an infinite God to take pain in our lives to open us to the ultimate possibility of a life with hope and without tears?
Now, we hinted at this earlier. We're talking about how people are maybe more educated today, more sophisticated today, maybe a little more cynical today. But you've been doing this for a long time now. You go around to universities and maybe even hostile environments, sometimes intellectually hostile environments, and talk about Christ and apologetics. How over those years has it changed? Are the questions you're getting changing? Is the audience changing?
All of that is yes. You know, one of my great heroes, and I think the greatest voice in evangelism possibly after the post-apostolic period, is that of Billy Graham. Yeah, there have been great ones like D.L. Moody and Billy Sunday and Jonathan Edwards and all of them. They were all there for their time and they were addressing their time, but nobody spoke to more human beings in live audiences than Dr. Billy Graham. Not a sophisticated philosopher in his own terms, but the gospel at a shelf level that had access for everybody. I sat on a platform once in Atlanta and saw him give the invitation. It was like a waterfall of people. The vice president of CNN was there, Jimmy Carter was there, Coretta Scott King were there. We were on the platform. I'd never seen anything like it. He was a master at evangelism at a simple level. So the fruit that was easy to pick over the years gone by has been picked, Matt. Now the tough ones are there, because now they are the product of a mass distribution of skepticism and cynicism. Yes, and what I see is the face-to-face and the writings and the methods we use. But now I see well-thinking people, professors, scientists, aeronautical engineers. I talk to them. They are followers of Christ. The media doesn't often like to cover these stories. In India, one of the men I met and chatted with is an editor of a major magazine. His conversion from Hinduism to Jesus is remarkable. We have to understand it has changed. What has changed is the easy harvest has been done. The tougher harvest is before us. That's one thing. Number two, the questions have changed. It used to be from cerebrally driven ones to existential right questions. The pursuit of justice is very important in our times. And the young generation, I just came off a telephone call, and the whole issue the guy is dealing with is ecological justice. You know, he's doing his program, overseas. 20, 30 years ago, you would get very few people thinking of subjects like that. We have to understand that. why they are raising the question. The Greeks were right. Justice is the firmest pillar of good government. But the Greeks never ultimately came to the answer to the source of virtue. And that's why that democracy fell apart. And if we don't come to those answers, we will fall apart too. So we can't talk of symptomatic issues without talking of essential issues. The basic question is this: what does it mean to be human? Until we answer that, all of these are symptomatic issues without diagnosing what is really the question.
Some Christians today are very worried about the illiberal left and that religious liberty is in jeopardy. And some criticism of them has been that they are turning to earthly kings and political power. I'll just ask you in general, you're thinking about the state of the evangelical world today, and should Christians really be afraid of the way things are heading, or are you optimistic?
Everybody's afraid. Even the skeptic is afraid. The skeptic is afraid that the Christian is going to be heard. And the Christian is afraid that the judicial system is going to run amok without the presuppositions of what law is all about. You know, I think the classic issue took place years ago in a historic trial where one of the lawyers defending that gentleman said, we don't make moral judgments, we make legal judgments. So he never answered the question whether the person was actually guilty or not. What he was saying is we are finding the best way to use the process to exonerate this person, not whether he did it or not. And I think there's reason to be concerned, Matt. I don't necessarily go to sleep worried, but I do get concerned where we are headed. But I could see this coming, not in a prophetic sense, but you go back to the 60s, which is when I came to the West. I was 20 years old and moved to Toronto, Canada. The movements that were going on, it was sort of right in the thick of the Vietnam War. And I went to Vietnam at the age of 25, not to fight. I went to work with the chaplains, and I went all the way from Vung Tau in the south through Saigon to Quang Tri in the north, 25 miles from the demilitarized zone, sat literally at night and watched that amber-colored sky and all that was going on with most of the soldiers who didn't even know why they were there. That's when the Cultural Revolution really began. 60s and 70s, and then came Vietnam and Watergate and the upheaval, and those who were the rebels of those days ended up as professors 20 years later, and the education system began not only to decry any absolutes, but to mock those who believed in absolutes. The problem is not whether we disagree. The problem is, are we going to have the civility to allow the other person to voice his or her opinion and defend it? And what the left is doing that I think is ultimately going to bring incalculable loss to themselves as well is taking away the arena of civil dialogue. You don't raise your son or daughter by mocking them. What are they going to do when they get of age? They're going to mock you. You have to create an arena where disagreement is possible, but disagreeableness should be viewed upon with great frowning stares. I still remember watching All in the Family and all of that in the 70s and so on. All right, I was going to go to grad school at that time. And I noticed what was happening. Who was being mocked? The person who was being mocked and caricatured was the one who held to a right view, politically speaking, on the liberal spectrum. He was made to look like the bigot. He was made to look like the fool.
He was also the one who was making all the money for the family.
Exactly. And both sides were making money. This is it. You know, I look at people mocking the United States, but living off the fat of the land. I can't figure it out. If you truly don't like the United States, why are you making your living within the framework that you so decry and debunk? But contradiction is the hallmark of wrong thinking. Wrong thinking will always believe in self-stultifying statements. You have to have civility. I do not want to raise a son who talks about rights without knowing what is right. And that's why I always say our problem is not right or left, our problem is up or down. And if we only stay right or left, we'll be at each other's throats. When we start with up or down, we know how to deal with the down because we know the values of what it means to be up.
Your new book is called The Logic of God. Talk about that.
Well, thank you so much. It's the latest one. It's the first one that I've written on devotional thinking. But it is intended at a level that even the skeptic can read. I used to do my devotions every day, okay? But a lot of reading, and by Tuesday, you've just about forgotten what you read on Monday because you're moving on. I wanted to do 52, that you start off every week with some, hopefully, things worth thinking about, whatever is true, noble, good, or even something that is challenging to you, and then connect it to scriptures and connect it to a discussion within yourself. So you're growing with the thought. The original title was called Thank God It's Monday, because you begin your week, brother, you've just come off a rest, good or bad weekend, and you've got to have some spiritual nurture. If you don't have spiritual nurture for each week, the world will shape you through the rest of the week. If you have good spiritual nurture, it nurtures you to see how to look at the week. So it's 52 studies called The Logic of God. What it really means is, what the brain is to the body, the mind is to the soul. How to think on things. That's really what it's all about. And so hopefully some of the thinking of God on various matters of pain, suffering, meaning, purpose, how to get over the past mistakes, and issues of family, issues of sexuality and all of that. So The Logic of God is 52 Christian essays. I don't think it'll take a person more than 7 to 8 minutes to read the essay and then reflect on it. And hopefully as they're driving to work, say, I need to think about that a little more. So it's to give you a context for the text that you face every day.
I know you're in Washington, D.C. to announce a new initiative. Talk about that.
Well, I give credit to the younger team. I'm part of a team of 90 speakers, Matt. They are placed in 15 countries. We really proclaim the message of Jesus Christ, undergirded with apologetics, rational thought, reasoning, but the message of Christ remains intact. And we do it at 4 levels: academic, political, business, and the arts. We're all over the map. Even as I speak to you, some of my other speakers are, I don't know, somewhere in the UK universities or political arenas. This one at the table is primarily to work with the thinking people in the political and the business to dialogue on issues that are dividing us. If you don't talk, you're never going to find answers. You will have false thinkings of the other person. If you're separated from somebody for a long time, how all kinds of wrong beliefs can come in. You sit across a table, a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or a nice bowl of Indian curry and rice or something. There's something about the gastronomical intake that changes your mindset too, and say, hey, I'm eating with a friend. That's why Jesus talks so much about being at a place where he was enjoying a meal, whether it's Bethany or whatever. At the table is sitting with some food in front of you, dialoguing on important issues at the highest level of government or the highest level of academia or business, just learning to respect each other and allowing God to work wonders in the hearts of people. So At the Table is a new initiative. I'm here in Washington. We have one tonight with some senators and chiefs of staff and other people present. Then we have a breakfast tomorrow with a devotional chaplain Black is leading that for the Senate, the chaplain to the Senate. This is just the beginning, but actually I'm just coming in now. Some of my younger team have already been doing this for the last 2 or 3 days. But it is a new initiative. We hope the table will be spread for many years to come, and that the inspiration will not just be in the taste of food, but the taste of ultimate reality in God himself.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'll just give you kind of a final word. If someone's out there listening, maybe they're struggling with something, maybe they're suffering, I don't know, what would you leave them with?
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for what you do, Matt. The fact is, you have no idea who all's listening to you, where they're listening to you, and your voice is carried. My challenge to anybody is this: deep in your heart and deep in my heart is the ultimate quest for who we are. And the only way you know who we are is when you find out whose we are. And once you know the God who's created you and find that intimate relationship with him, all other intimacies are redefined. It's like the old Kingston Trio song of 2 generations gone by. If you're thirsty and you come to this pump and you start pumping and you find out it's dry, look for the directions. And the directions say there's a bottle of water buried under here, pour it into the tank, into the system there, and it'll start working and more water will come out. If you empty it out, you will get more water coming out. If you consume it on yourself, you'll soon be thirsty again, and so will everybody else following you. My word to them is, empty out your life into the hands of the living God, who through Christ offers you that drink of water so that you'll never thirst again. You consume your life upon yourself, you'll soon be thirsty again. Empty it out into his hands, and you will find the living water and the bread of life. So if you're hurting, questioning, struggling, whatever the ache and pain is, come to the author of your life, who made your DNA and understands what you're going through. He's the only one who can bring total fulfillment to your life and your destiny.
All right, everybody, check out the new devotional book. It's called The Logic of God. Ravi Zacharias, thank you for coming on the news.
Thanks for having me, Matt, and God bless you.